From the award-winning activist Ruchira Gupta, I Kick and I Fly is the heartwarming story of courage and second chances set against the dire odds of human trafficking. Ruchira joins our editor Ankita Deshpande to talk about her inspiring journey and the book.
Hello, everyone, and a very happy World Book Day 2024 to all our viewers. Hi, Ruchira. A very warm welcome to the live to you. And
Hi.
hi. We are so glad you could join us on this day. And you have the book in your hand, as I can see.
Yes, here it is.
Yes.
I kick and I fly.
So I'll do a very quick introduction of Ruchira for everybody who's tuned in, and then we can start. So Ruchira Gupta is the founder president of Apne Aap Women Worldwide, which is an organization working to end sex trafficking in India. She's a social justice activist, a feminist campaigner, a journalist, an Emmy Award-winning documentarian, and a professor at New York University who has dedicated her life to creating a world where no child is bought or sold. And I Kick and I Fly, which Ruchira is holding, is her debut novel. And we will hear from Ruchira about it in detail, I'm sure. But just to give a very quick introduction, it is about a young girl in India called Hira, who fights to keep herself and those around her safe from sex trafficking. So yeah, that's the premise. And Ruchira,
And
if
through
you
the
could...
power of Kung Fu and women's action.
Yes, which is an absolutely unique take, I think, on the topic. I mean, who would have thought of combining the two? So great, that's lovely. When we talk about women's issues, there's always this argument that why is it still necessary in 2024 to be talking about women's issues at all when we are talking about a world that is full of equality and where women are in the workforce, women are doing everything that men have traditionally done. Why is it still important to talk about women's issues? And if you could talk about this in the context of the work that your organization does and also of this book.
We are in the 21st century and women have made huge strides. The biggest stride, of course, is that we have the power to vote. And just a few centuries ago, women had to fight for it. So that's huge. But we don't have enough members in any parliament or Senate or Congress in the world. Proportionately, the highest in any country is 25%, but no country has 50% women and 50% men. So political participation in decision making is still very low. At the corporate level, too, there is a glass ceiling still for women. So what we find is that the salaries of men are higher in board chairs and board seats, and also CEOs of companies are mostly men. Even in companies where technology is the supreme engine which is driving the company, which women can do extremely competently, but even so, women haven't got those positions. In banks, the same situation. Even at the United Nations, where I worked for 10 years, most of the top positions go for women, go for men. And this year we have 5 female candidates in the race for the Secretary General. And I hope finally we'll break that glass ceiling at the UN. But, in terms of work, in terms of health, in terms of salaries, in terms of financial empowerment, everywhere we are still far, far behind. And of course, this rests on 2 or 3 things, which is education and health. And again, in that too, women's access to health is still not good enough. Women are tend to be more anemic, more stunted in height because we don't get the same amount of food as our brothers do growing up in most situations where there is income inequality. And also, we don't have the same amount of education that men do. So access to education is very important for women. We are pulled out of school early to get married. We won't be sent for higher education. That why does a woman need to learn? She's supposed to look after the family and stay at home. So because of that, our chances for jobs are less likely to be the higher paid ones. And that is something called feminization of poverty. So, and all this begins from the time we are born. It's as soon as that you're born that you realize that it's all right for one group of human beings to order and one to obey. one to get paid for their jobs and one not to get paid for their chores, one to seek approval and one to give approval. So gender digs a trench into our brain, and when we step out into the world, all other inequalities fall. So it is a problem for us, even as girls, and more so as girls, because we have no agency at that time. And, even girls are subjected to violence. That's the final thing I wanted to talk about, that to keep women unequal, women are subjected to huge amounts of violence, both at home, in the office or workplace, and anywhere in public places, from just being beaten around, to being raped, to being murdered. In the work that I do, the number of girls and women who are trafficked for sexual exploitation every year is millions, millions of them. At any given moment, there are about 20 million women and girls in our world today who are trapped in situations of exploitation because they have been trafficked. And the average age of a girl being trafficked into sexual exploitation is between 9 and 13 in India and 13 and 15 in America. So, from dowry deaths to sex trafficking to domestic violence to just being deprived of food and education, is a lot for a girl or a woman to take on. And
Yes,
that is why
absolutely.
today we have to fight on.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, sometimes it feels like the issues are so disbalanced even across the geographies. So it's like if women in third world countries, or even they always get the shorter end of the stick. And your organization is, of course, doing invaluable work to, create some sort of a balance in that regard as well. So that brings me to my next point. How do you ensure as a writer, and this is for all budding writers who might be listening to this conversation, to ensure that any piece of writing that you are undertaking does not come across as tokenistic in any way? Because there's always this argument that only people who have undergone a certain experience are allowed to, in that sense, talk about that experience. Otherwise, it is no longer authentic. So how do you approach that in writing?
I think authenticity comes from writing from your own true place and not from having undergone the experience. It can also come from empathy. And good writing reflects empathy because it's a merging of what conversations we have within our soul, in our minds, in our hearts, the interiority, and how we connect those conversations we have inside ourselves, with ourselves, to the situations of people around us who may not have gone through the same experience. So if I write about sex trafficking, obviously I've not been a victim of sex trafficking, I've not been raped, I haven't experienced sexual violence. But as a woman, I have faced discrimination and slights, and I've had a lot of conversations inside myself that why does this have to be so? So when I worked as an NGO leader, running the NGO Apne Aap to end sex trafficking in the red light areas, if I saw a woman being discriminated against, at least I could think of a dialogue which came from a place of discrimination, which I could add into the woman's voice. Something I heard, something I witnessed, something I experienced are all merged into it. And that is what good literature does. It writes about truth and hope from a place of vulnerability and authenticity where you have to be true to your own true self. Otherwise, it'll be a manufactured book. So the writing process doesn't have to become the thing it's writing about, but it has to write it from the point of view of the author. And the author's point of view has to be authentic.
Absolutely, yeah. So important to be authentic and honest about what you're writing.
Fantasy fiction, right? We are not in a different planet. We are not in a different century. But yet we put thoughts and feelings and emotions into our characters, right? And kids connect with that. And that is the point which we must understand, that what are people going to connect with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that connection will only come from something if I write it authentically.
Right. Yeah.
And this is
That's
very true for young readers and young writers who are listening in, because very often we think identity can replace an issue. So, just wearing dress in a certain way, or wearing a t-shirt with a certain slogan, or saying that I am part of this more so because I am born to this religion, this community, this ethnicity, this gender, may or may not always be true, because someone who comes from a very marginalized caste could also be the son of, say, a very rich politician. So on one hand, they come from a caste which has a history of marginalization, but on the other hand, they have never experienced deprivation because they have money. Now, should that person be writing about caste? I would say yes, because they have heard stories of their families and because they have seen things around them to other caste people, which they may have access to, or at least have some empathy because they know it happened to their grandmother, grandfather, great grandmother, grandfather. So I would say that authenticity comes from also listening and internalizing and then putting it on paper.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's so important. And it's also what brings relevance to the writing also, right? Otherwise, there would be no point in reading about something that happened maybe 20 years ago, 40 years ago, or 100 years ago, sitting here in the 21st century in 2024. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And now moving on to a slightly lighter question. That doesn't mean that it's any less important, but so there are a lot of celebrity-run book clubs that have recently become popular across the internet, and a lot of these pick books by women authors as their monthly picks. So there's Twinkle Khanna's Tweak India Book Club. There's also Sonali Bendra's book club, and Lily Singh in the US, who in Canada, who also focuses on writing that is by women and for women. So how do you think that influences a general reader's choice of books and how they walk into a bookstore and what they pick as their next read?
For example, when Oprah Winfrey chooses a book, then that book does become a bestseller because she has a following and, because of a TV show and other things. So I think it does have an impact on the driving the initial sales of a book. After that, the book has to stand on its own two legs. Because if I read the story and I like it, then I'm obviously going to pass it on to somebody else and say, hey, have you read this book? And then the story becomes the vehicle through which the book sells. And then it is not even about the author, it's between the book and the reader. And, in publishing, there's a term called the book will have a long tail. It means the book will last year after year. So normally the shelf life of a book is 6 months. But if a book is really good, it will last for year after year. People will keep reading it. You'll still see it in bookstores. Libraries will stock it. It might get into school and college and syllabuses. People will discuss it. And then the book has become really like a classic. So
Absolutely.
celebrities do have initial power to push a book forward, but the rest is up to the story.
Yeah, yeah. And also up to how the author talks about the book and in what platforms they're able to promote it, right?
I think so. I think that, if people don't know about the book, then how will they read it? Especially if you're a debut author like me. But I really did not want to create like a manufactured market for it through branding and all of that. I wanted there to be a groundswell. So, because I'm an activist, so therefore I went into small libraries in villages in Bihar and spoke to young people there. I also went into schools and colleges across the world in Harlem Village Academy or Sanskar School in Jaipur or my own alma mater, Modern High School, and even to colleges across the country, from Loreto to Stella Maris to St. Joseph's to Sophia, Mitabai, And the reason was that I wanted young people to read the book. The book, as you know, is about a 14-year-old girl called Hira, who escapes being sold into the sex trade by getting enrolled into a kung fu program through a women's rights activist, right? And through the practice of kung fu, she discovers the power of her body and learns to fight for it. She's expelled from school. There's no food from home. Her father wants to sell her into the cattle fair. Very extreme situation, right? And she's growing up in a red light area of mud huts, which are all brothels and homes at the same time. Yet, the reason I did this, for 1 year, I've been in a different college every single week. For 1 year now. The book came out last April 18th in New York. And I keep getting more and more invitations to colleges. Yesterday, I spoke at New York University, day before at Fordham. Monday, I go to speak at another class in New York University. So what is happening is that young people are finding something relevant in this book. And the reason I went to schools and colleges with this book is because what is happening to Hira is not that she's the only one. There are thousands of Hiras across the world who are being sex trafficked, right? And as I mentioned earlier, they're between the ages of 9 and 15. So I felt that young people need to know what's happening to young people their age. Normally, we hide things from people thinking this will protect them, but I feel that we need to break the silence to change the end. And so I wanted young people to know about this and become activists in my journey to create this world in which no human being is bought or sold. But the other thing was that I also have been reading, and I know that every kid across the world is going through something called a mental health crisis. Every teenager, every young adult. And they are going through this, experiencing this because of, we say, social media. But why? Because on social media and at home, what is happening, and in school, kids are facing bullying, body shaming, and some kind of sexual abuse, which may or may not be sex trafficking. So through the third person of Hira in this, I've written it like a fast-paced adventure story. But, through all the cliffhangers and the struggles that Hira takes on and the fights that she goes through and the criminals she encounters and the conversations she has with her family and friends, deals with complicated family relationships, kids actually can find answers to something in their own lives. So they can know that they are not crazy, the system is crazy. And they are not alone, it's a more of a universal problem. And that takes away the shame, fear, and guilt, which every teenager and young adult is experiencing. So, I don't describe sex in my book, but I describe all the issues around it and how it happens and how you can fight for yourself. So it's struck a chord. For example, I was in a school in India, in Patna, and a girl told me that, I don't talk to my father because he beats my mother. And I used to feel guilty. But then I saw how Hira stood up to her father, and it was a good thing. So I'm feeling better about myself. Now, this is important. We never talk about these issues. We can't, we feel, oh my God, the parent may object, or there's shame, the girl may feel stigmatized, but girls need to know. Or, in another place, one boy told me that, I really liked, I have complicated characters in my novel. And there's the class bully who's called Manish. And then, of course, there's Hira's brother who's called Salman. And the class bully is a bad guy, teasing Hira, stealing her egg, getting her expelled from school. But Salman, her brother, says that I will drop out of school, even though I love science and want to be a scientist, and become a porter on the railway station so that I can earn enough money that you can go to school. And he says, I will cut my dreams to size so that my little sister is not trafficked. So there are good guys and bad guys in the book. And one boy asked me, he was 14, and he said that, I want to know more about Salman. What's his story? Did he become a scientist? So the importance of providing role models that kids can empathize with. My characters are convincing, they are flawed. They go through ups and downs, highs and lows. They have complicated family relationships, betrayals in friendships, right? So the power of good literature is that it is based on truth, but has hope, and yet is convincing and authentic, to come back to your word, in some fashion, both authentic for the reader and for the writer. And of course, true to the characters that you're writing about. Because the characters begin to tell you when you're writing who they are. Like if Hira is an impulsive street fighter, she will tell me, I'm going to fight now, whether you want to put in a writing scene or not. And that scene gets written.
And it's so good to know that the book struck a chord with readers, and readers were able to, relate to it and share their own personal experiences about things that they may have experienced in their life. But what did you also come across people who claim that these issues don't exist anymore, or you're writing about a world that no longer exists? And did you have to convince anyone that women's issues are still important and issues like these need to be written about, be talked about more?
Thank God, no. I've been traveling. Literally, I've traveled across the world. From Asia to Europe to America and round again, right? And I've been into small villages, big towns from like Bombay or New York, and small places in Harrisburg in Pennsylvania or Forbesganj and around in Bihar. Nobody has said that this doesn't exist. So that much awareness is there in the world right now that these things exist. They are in plain sight, but they are invisible because we don't talk about it. So what this book has done is made people talk about it in places where it would not be talked about. Because we might have talked about it in an NGO conference or a policy forum, but now this is in schools and colleges, which is so huge. And Gloria Steinem blurbed my book, and she said this book could save lives. And I thought this is kind of a huge blurb and endorsement. I wonder what that means. And I found out. I found out as I've traveled, because kids are coming and talking to me very personal things, and how this book helped them get over either their fear or their shame or their guilt, or connect, the sense of losing connection, the sense of alienation, and how this book helped them reconnect. So it's triggered conversations between young adults with other young adults, literary societies in colleges. But what it's also done is it's triggered conversations between adults and young adults who were both too ashamed to talk about these subjects. So I think there's something great going on. And, the French edition just came out, and like everywhere, it's being embraced by young people. And my Insta feed, for example, when I wrote the book, it was like 2000 or something. It's jumped up to 7,000, which is interesting to me that it's happening organically. It's happening through a groundswell. And that I want to see where it goes. Will this book have a long tail? And what does it mean if it has a long tail?
If it's impacting readers in that personal a manner, I hope that it does indeed have a very long tail and inspires many, many more people to speak their truth. And you made a very interesting point to reconnect with the elders in their lives, the adults in their lives who might actually be able to help them. So that's a very important outcome, I think.
It's huge because, if we can inspire adults, and I think adults are shyer to talk about these subjects with young people than young people are. And so to break the barrier.
Yes, yes. And while you were writing this book, you must have drawn inspiration from books and uh, pieces of content that you yourself read in your growing up years, or maybe as you became a writer. So would you be able to share some names, some titles with us?
Yes, in my book, I mentioned some of the writers that I love because, I like to introduce secretly names of writers I love. So there's Tagore and Sharat Chandra and Mahadevi Verma and Enid Blyton and Laura Lee Hope, who used to write the Bobbsey twin adventures. I've always been inspired as a kid by the adventure stories, like, those by Enid Blyton or Bobbsey twins, etc. Nancy Drew. I was quite inspired by them. And then later, when I read Little Women, I was so wanting to become a writer, just like Jo. And, so she was a big inspiration to me, Louisa May Alcott. And the way she wrote, America was going through tough times. The family didn't have enough money, but the sisters were having adventure and fun, and they had dreams and aspirations. And I liked that. So, this year, after writing my book, I actually went and visited Louisa May Alcott's house, and it was kind of fun. It was almost like a pilgrimage. The other writer I'm very inspired by is Charles Dickens, because he wrote about society from the point of view of children quite often. If you know about David Copperfield or Oliver Twist. And his point of view through those kids actually changed how society understood the lives of children who were struck by poverty, right? So it's after Charles Dickens' writing that we actually gave a name to something called child labor. We didn't even have a word like child labor till then. So I am hoping that through my characters, adults who are reading the book, and this is really a crossover book, um, are also finding ways to understand that, what does hunger mean? And how can we make sure that the system does provide food to kids in inner cities or in slums so that they can concentrate in school? How they will understand that we have to ensure that children have school supplies who come from deprived backgrounds, that they're not discriminated against, that they need after school help with homework. How even protection is something that they don't have on a daily basis. There are kids who will take multiple vacations every year, right? And there are kids who'll have no vacation ever. So
Yeah.
we have to empathize and understand, and what does it mean? And that's what I want adults to read and understand from this, and make sure that whatever part of the universe that life has given them, where they have some impact, they can make sure to reach out to this last girl.
And any special recommendations for our for growing up girls?
Yeah,
Maybe
I
everyone
like
who are
Holly
women
Bourne.
writers.
Holly Bourne is a wonderful author. And today is the World Day of Books. So happy World Day of Books, everyone who's reading. Of course, I have a long list of writers that I want you to read. I love Nilanjana Roy's Black River. Definitely, it's a must for anyone who's thinking about Delhi and migration. I like Amitabh Ghosh's Smoke and Ashes. And then I like Holly Bourne. Any of Holly Bourne's writings for girls is amazing, because she actually writes about dating and romance and friendships and loss of self-esteem and how you can recover it, and mental health issues in the most interesting way. I love Girl in Pieces by Catherine Glasgow. It's about a young girl dealing with addiction and how she gets through a day, a piece at a time, and it's beautifully written. Of course, Nikesh Shukla's books are interesting because they're about fighting, and I like girl fighters. So I've always wanted girls to be superheroes, and we don't have to wait for some other superhero to come rescue us. I like recently I read a wonderful book, and you all may have read it, but I read Hunger Games this year, and I found it very compelling. I liked a book about race, how a young girl witnesses the arrest of her best friend in school in a inner city in America, and they live in a Black neighborhood. It's called The Hate You Give. It's worth reading because it sort of makes you understand discrimination and how kids have to face up to it, and especially when there's a bad police system. I also liked Yellowface a lot. So I think I've given a long list of books that I like.
Yes, yes. And I'm sure all our Wonder Women would love to pick up these books and read them.
Oh, and Angelina Boli, The Firekeeper's
Okay.
Daughter.
All right. Yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you, Ruchira, for that long list of recommendations, and also for joining us today. And I encourage everyone to pick up Ruchira's book, I Kick and I Fly. You can see the cover, that very nice cover with a girl with the most determined look on her face. Is something we all aspire to. And as long as we live, as long as there are women and men and everybody else on earth, I think women's issues will be important for us to talk about. And that brings us to the end of our conversation today on World Book Day. Continue to read, and thank you, Ruchira, once again.
And happy World Book Day.
Happy World Book Day. Yes.